Louisiana was loosely defined as all the territory drained by rivers flowing east into the Mississippi River. Now that's a kind of vague definition, but it includes most of the land between the Mississippi River and the Rocky Mountains and between, say, Canada and Texas. So it was an enormous territory.
Up until 1800, what we call the Louisiana Purchase was owned by Spain and had been since 1763. In 1800, Spain then traded Louisiana to France.
Well, Spain saw Louisiana, that territory, as being a buffer to English and then later American expansion that they hoped could protect from New Mexico and Texas. But also the French were wanting it back because I think they wanted to reestablish themselves in North America.
France at that time was the most powerful nation in Europe. It was ruled by Napoleon. It was on top of the heap on the continent. Napoleon himself had designs on rebuilding a French empire in North America, and Louisiana was to be the basis of that. By 1803, France and Napoleon realized that they were about to go back to war with England. At the same time, Napoleon had suffered a disastrous defeat in Santo Domingo in the West Indies. Napoleon realized he was about to go back to war. He needed cash. He was cash poor. And so he decided simply to sell it off, sell this, not just New Orleans, but sell the entire purchase to the United States.
New Orleans was really the goal because it's a major port city in the area, and for the American West at the time, between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, it was important to control that port for trade for all these American farmers who are moving into the West. So it's quite a shock when Napoleon's government is willing to hand over the whole Louisiana territory for $15 million.
$15 million at that time was a huge amount of money. Jefferson worried a lot about that. Jefferson politically believed that it was important to reduce and eventually eliminate the national debt. Well, the only way that we could come up with $15 million was to borrow it. But in the end, Jefferson decided that the benefits of the purchase were worth the money and worth going deeper into debt.
Jefferson saw Louisiana as being part of what later would be called an empire of liberty, that in having enough land for American settlers, that there would be enough farmland for Americans, because he believed that the best way for the United States to be, the best form of government, was for this to be a government of independent citizens, independent landowners.
At the time that Jefferson and the United States Congress bought Louisiana, they didn't really know what they had bought. Jefferson's first goal then was to try to define this area geographically. Jefferson sent not one but 3 expeditions in an attempt to define more clearly what the southern boundary of the purchase was. One of those was the first expeditions to penetrate into what's today western Arkansas. That was the expedition of Hunter and Dunbar that moved up the Red and then up the Ouachita River to Hot Springs.
After Dunbar and Hunter, there was another attempt, the Freeman expedition in 1805, which went up the Red River, but was turned back by the Spanish at what is now basically the border between Arkansas and Texas.
The third expedition, the one that's probably the most famous and also the most controversial, was that led by Zebulon Pike. Pike went up to the north first, onto the central Great Plains, down to the Arkansas River, followed the Arkansas until it reached the Rocky Mountains, and from there attempted to find the headwaters of the Red. He found what he thought was the Red River. It turned out to be the Rio Grande, was arrested by the Spanish, taken to Santa Fe and Chihuahua, and eventually sent back home. So these 3 expeditions to try to define the southern boundary of the purchase all failed. They do testify about the importance of defining the southern border to Jefferson. And beyond that, I think they tell us about how interested people in what's today Louisiana and Arkansas were about expanding to the southwest. By acquiring Louisiana, the United States also brought within its borders thousands of Indian peoples living in that region from the Red River northward to Canada, westward to the Rocky Mountains and into the Pacific Northwest. These Indian peoples, of course, saw themselves as all independent culturally, independent politically and economically. They certainly did not recognize themselves formally as part of the United States or having much of anything to do with the United States. Most of them did not really know what the United States was.
Jefferson thought it would still be decades before white settlement move to the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River was going to be that dividing line between the civilized whites east of the river and the Indians west of the river.
For a while, there was a real possibility that Arkansas would have been Indian territory, but by around 1810 or so, a major change is taking place, and large numbers of Americans are coming into Arkansas. When Arkansas becomes a separate territory in 1819, there are about 14,000 people who are citizens of the United States. And by 1820, the first steamboat arrives at Arkansas Post, and during the 1820s, Arkansas begins to get tied into a market economy. The American settlers in Arkansas effectively kicked out the Indians. By 1820, there's settlement all over the state, and there's some 14,000 people. Arkansas becomes a state with 60,000 or so people in 1836. There's 100,000 by 1840 or so, 400,000 by 1860.
The Louisiana Purchase, looking back on it, was one of the most important events in American history, certainly one of the most important events of the early years of the Republic. And some of the most important consequences were toward the southern end of the Purchase. That was the area that eventually would feel the greatest pressure from the expansion of the United States. The Indians of that area would feel the pressure and eventually would find themselves overwhelmed and would lose their independence. And New Spain and then Mexico would feel that pressure and would eventually lose all of its territory in what is today Texas and the American Southwest and California. The event that really lit the fuse for that explosive activity was the Louisiana Purchase.